The Ys series is surely one of the most long-lasting, yet somewhat unknown JRPG series of all time. Having started way back in 1987 with the first release of Ys 1 on the PC 8800 under the supervision of Nihon Falcom, the series has never been properly considered a mainstream JRPG saga, at least here in the West, though it seems like the situation is the same even in its homeland, aka Japan. And even nowadays, a time where basically all of the main games of the saga have been released in the West, it still remains a somewhat obscure series, even though it is still continuing up to this day. However, we are not here to discover the reasons why this series is actually not that well known. I leave this duty to someone more knowledgeable than me about it. But we are here because of a simple reason. I like JRPGs, and I've always heard of the Ys series, but never actually played it. That is, until recently, when I decided that it was finally time to try getting into it, which meant also deciding where to start, and I settled on the first ever released game in its remake version dubbed Ys 1 and 2 Chronicles Plus, which got released on PC in 2013. So, in this video, we are here to reply to a simple question. How did Ys 1 age? And can it still be enjoyed even today? Now, before starting, some notices. First, I'm only going to talk about Ys 1. While technically Ys 1 and 2 are meant to be two chapters of the same story, thus they are kind of meant to be a single game, I decided to review only the first one for a simple reason. If the first game does not hold up or is not a great game, I doubt the majority of people are going to play the second one, unless they are completionists or they have an either masochistic side, and many times these two things are not mutually exclusive. So, if by chance I say something negative about this game and you are going to scream at your screen, saying to my hologram that what I am complaining about is explained in the second game, this is the reason why I'm saying that. It's not to piss anyone off, just that this is a review of the first game, and all of that. Secondly, and this is not something important for the video, but if you ever want to actually play the Ys saga and you are here because you want an opinion on the first game before playing it, know that there are various entry points for it. I chose to play Ys 1 as my first game of the series, but there are various games you can play as an introduction to it. If you want more information about this, I will leave a link to a website specifically designed to, citing the website, spread awareness of Ys, where you will be able to find all the information you want in order to get started with this JRPG series. Third, technically, the Chronicles Plus edition gives you two choices when starting a new game. You can either play the Chronicles or the complete version. I don't know whether there are some differences between these two versions. Technically there should be none, at least that's what I have gathered around, but if there are, know that I played the Chronicles edition of the game, thus if there effectively are some differences between the two, remember this. Lastly, this video is probably going to contain spoilers about the game, so if you intend to play it and don't want to be spoiled, close the video right now and maybe watch it after you have finished the game. Having said this, let's start. Now, Ys starts with our hero, adult Christine, being washed on the shore of the land of Esteria, an island that since 6 months has been enshrouded by a storm called Stormwall and has thus been claimed to be cursed. This is the reason that pushed Adol into coming to Esteria, as he wanted to understand what was happening on the island. After being saved by some villagers of the nearby village of Barbado and have discovered that, since the formation of the Stormwall, monsters have started roaming the land, wreaking havoc in the entire region, he sets off for the main city of the island, Minea, where he meets a fortune teller by the name of Sara, who tells him to have seen him in her visions and that he is going to play a key role in Esteria's fate. She then asks him to collect the 6 books of Ys, volumes where it is told the tale of the Kingdom of Ys, a forgotten reign that was located exactly in the land of Esteria, from its rise up to its demise, and according to Sara, they are going to be vital for the salvation of the region. Thus, Adol sets out on a journey to find all 6 books of Ys in order to uncover the various mysteries that enshroud Esteria. Now, the plot I have told you is mainly a thread that gives the player a reason to go from point A to point B and to come to blows with the monsters of the region, but it doesn't exactly go beyond that. What it reduces to is go to this dungeon, clear it, get a book, return, read the content of the book, go to a new dungeon, and so on. This is the major gameplay loop the game puts you in, and for which the plot is required, so not to make it seem like a random quest you have obtained because yes. The plot is mostly linear, and after the first hour of gameplay, it quickly disappears to give a more preponderant role to the gameplay. However, there is still space for some side quests the game hints you about, like the Silver Harmonica quest for Rhea, Troubadour in Minea, which ends with a cryptic message to another character you are going to find during your various peregrinations, Fina, a girl that lost her memory, who was imprisoned in the shrine's basement, and that has some rather unusual achievements tied to her, if you want to call them that. Still, for how much the plot per se is just a fil rouge, the lore is not. Through some interactions with certain characters during the story, and through the reading of the 6 books of Ys, you are exposed to the story of the demise of the Kingdom of Ys and to the past of the land of Esteria. It is nothing breathtaking nor extremely preponderant, and the exposition is quite messy at times, especially for what concerns the book's text, which is a bit obscure in some instances, and which I don't know whether it was a choice by the development team or whether it was just a translation problem, though I propend for the first of these two options. Still, in its simplicity and, in the end, little time the game gives it to shine, the lore does its job at characterizing the almost mythological Kingdom of Ys and to give some answers to the player as to the mysteries that surround the land of Esteria. However, some questions still remain after the first game. Who are the true goddesses of the legend? What was the white light that enveloped Adol at the end? What was Fina doing in the prison of a shrine? Why was Rhea imprisoned in the final dungeon? In reality, to some of these questions you can probably give an answer based on some details of the lore and of the story, but they can feel a bit forced by just knowing what happens in the first game, so I think these questions are things that are going to be answered in the second one, which is not the greatest thing ever, as it makes the game feel like it didn't conclude much, though it does, considering it effectively closes the story the game was trying to portray, but it still leaves some pretty important unanswered questions, which may not be that much satisfying for the player. Still, a thing I have to praise this game for is its world, or better, the way it changes around you. The places around you effectively somewhat react to the story progression. It is nothing major, but seeing that, after a story event, some characters are in different places, others have other lines of dialogues, etc., is a good way to make the player feel like the world is somewhat alive and reactive to the player's presence. Considering it is a small touch that many RPGs tend to ignore, it is surely something to highlight and to praise. After all, those little details are the ones that can make the player feel really immersed in the game, so when they are decently done, it is important to point it out. However, for one good thing, there is another one that ends up being undercooked, and this time is an important one, because the characters of this one are at best forgettable and at worst puppets for the plot, that are used to make you go from A to Z. None of the characters effectively gets a decent characterization. Adol doesn't, Fina doesn't, Rhea doesn't, Sarah doesn't. Any character of this game does not have a real characterization that is going to make you remember it after the game ends. The only positive thing here is Adol and Fina's relationship, but not because it develops that much, but more because the game does a good job at laying the foundations for a subsequent relationship, which, however, never really arrives. Again, I think this is one of the possible things that are going to be better developed in the second game, but alas, this is a video just on the first one, and in this game their relationship is just slightly introduced. Still, you can understand by Fina's dialogues and by the epilogue that they care for each other and probably also love each other, but apart from this, the game does nothing with it, which is a shame. More Fina moments would have been appreciated. Now, as I said before, it's pretty evident how this game favors its gameplay over its plot, so let's take a look at it. Ys 1 combat system is peculiar in that it uses the bump system. What is it? Well, it's a combat system where Adol auto-attacks every enemy that it touches, and the only thing you need to be wary of is where you are going to hit it. If you attack it frontally, then both you and the enemy are going to receive damage. However, if you attack it by adding a bit of an offset from the center, you're not going to receive any damage. So, if you attack slightly left or right from the center of the monster, you are going to only inflict damage while receiving none. You can also attack by the side or behind the monster, but in these cases, you could receive a little bit of damage, but not as much as by attacking the monster frontally. Now, if this system sounds extremely simple and strange at first, I can understand you. Effectively, it is a pretty peculiar battle system that is going to be a bit frustrating until you effectively understand it, but on the long run, It reveals itself to be a pretty solid and, personally, fun experience that gives birth to a fast-paced action gameplay. Though there is to say that, especially during the exploration phase, you're actually rarely going to bother with it, if not only at the beginning, because the leveling system makes it so that if you are even a level above the required one for the place you are in, you are basically going to steamroll every enemy on your path while taking minimal damage. In fact, let me talk a bit about it. The maximum level you can achieve in this game is 10, and you are going to be at that level basically a bit before the final dungeon. Every time you level up, you are going to see an increase in your stats, and this can be pretty significant, because, as I have said before that you can easily steamroll every enemy if you are even a level stronger than them, it is also true the contrary. If the enemy is a level more than you are going to have a bad time. This is especially a problem in one case. Bosses. Yes, unfortunately, some bosses in this one are not beatable unless you are on a specific level. Basically, the game gate keeps you from progressing unless you are at an acceptable level for it, which can be a frustrating experience, especially if it is your first time encountering it. Let me tell you my experience. You see this bed right here? This is Vagullion, one of the worst bosses of the entire game. I have arrived at this boss with relative ease, however, when I faced it for the first time, I inflicted a minuscule quantity of damage, while I got obliterated every time I got hit. Because up to that point the game had been a breeze in terms of difficulty, I got bewildered. I had the best equipment of the game, I was at a decent enough level to breeze through the dungeon it was located in. What was the problem? So I searched online, seeing if anyone had my same problem, but all the people were talking about was the randomness of the boss, which, fair enough, it is indeed a reason why it is one of the most frustrating bosses of this game, but no one talked about doing little to no damage. So, stubbornly, I proceeded to retry the battle for 5 straight times before again turning to the internet and reading a piece of information my brain had ignored up to that moment. Everyone recommended being at level 10. When I read that, I said to myself, but I am at level 10. Only to then discover that I was at level 9. Yes, for a single level, the battle was absolutely impossible. So I farmed a bit, got to level 10, and beat the boss first try. Look, I can understand this is a possible method to make it so that the game controls the progression of the player. But it can be pretty annoying if you end up encountering it when you think you should be able to advance, only for the game to blast the Blue Arcade soundtrack and proceed to look down menacingly at you. It is generally a pretty strict way of progression that does not reward the player for its skills or for its commitment, as it's basically the game gatekeeping itself until you have reached the conditions it thinks are necessary to progress. Anyways, we were talking about the bosses, so let me say some other things about them. They are generally not that hard, at least at normal difficulty, which in general is pretty easy overall. However, there are two, Vagullion and the final boss, that are mostly annoying because they are not really skill based, but luck based. I mean, the last boss is literally a Pong game with death traps, fireballs being constantly blasted at you, and the possibility of remaining trapped if you are unlucky enough. I doubt this is anyone's definition of fun. In general, the bosses are okay, pretty uninspired, apart from some, and generally rough around the edges. But, especially at higher levels of difficulty, they can give you a good challenge, both for reasonable and unreasonable reasons. Also, another unreasonable thing the game asks you is that, if you want to realistically finish the game, you need, and I am not joking, a determined set of equipment of which 2/3 are found in dungeons, and one is found by doing a side quest that, unless you talk to a determined character even when there is no reason to, or you actually skip a chest in a dungeon that contains the item you need for this side quest, you are not going to obtain, because arriving at it by yourself without any guide or without talking to the character in question is not exactly intuitive. I miss the old JRPG obscure fluff that is present for no reason whatsoever if not to give you a headache. It's nice to see it is even here. Last thing I wanted to talk about for the gameplay is the world map. While the world of East 1 is not that big, being composed of 3 cities, the paths between them and some dungeons, the denseness of the maps makes it feel bigger than what in reality it is, especially the first time you explore a zone. It is still pretty devoid of things as, in the end, excluding the cities, all the other maps are there only to bring you from point A to point B, but their configurations make the world pretty quick to explore if you want to only go from a point of it to another, but denser than what it really is the first time you actually set out to explore it, which is not an easy feat. Overall, the gameplay of this one aged rather gracefully, all things considered, and if you can keep up with a bit of old school JRPG quirkiness. And another thing for which I can say this is the graphics. Sure, we are talking about a remaster that got out 12 years ago, so of course, the graphics have been pumped up from the original, just see this comparison as an example. But in any case, the Chronicles version of the game makes use of a good pixel art for its sprites and world and also offers two sets of CGs and character sprites. These are the Chronicles one, offering a more Moe new-gen anime look, and the complete one, which instead offers a more old-school look. And you can switch between the two at will by just selecting the corresponding option in the menu. In general, the CGs are quite appreciable and overall, the graphics of this game are pretty and surely enjoyable even today, thanks to a good art style in the CGs and to a good pixel art for what concerns the rest. This is probably the point where there is a difference between the Complete and the Chronicles versions of this one, as the Complete has more of an old school look than the Chronicles one, so if that is your thing, the Complete edition is probably going to be the better version between the two. If the graphics hold well even today, the music is debatable. The main problem of this one under this aspect is using music that feels out of place. In general, this one's soundtrack is a 50-50, where the first 50% is good music that you could hear in a fantasy RPG, and the other half is music that leaves you baffled for how out of place it seems. Just listen to the music of the path between Barbado and Minea. I don't know you, but this is not the music I imagine when walking from a city to another one in a fantasy world. But maybe this is just me. In general, when the music is suited for the atmosphere it's used in, it enhances the experience, but when it doesn't, it flattens it, which is exactly what you wish the music in your game should not do. Overall, the game does not overextend its welcome, as at normal difficulty, it required me 6 hours in order to clear it. If you are looking for a replayable game, however, you are in the wrong place, as unless you want to beat the game at a higher difficulty or have a try at the boss rush mode the game unlocks you after you have beaten it, there is nothing more to do than to replay the same game you have already played, which is not necessarily a bad thing, as you can see that this one was not designed with that in mind. So, after all of this, let me restate the questions with which we have started the video. How did this one age? And can you still enjoy it even today? And, all in all, I can say with enough conviction that this one ages somewhat gracefully, surely helped by the remaster that it got in 2013. While the story is nothing crazy and leaves you with some unanswered questions by the end of it and the characters are forgettable puppets, the gameplay core of this one is, in its simplicity, solid enough to be enjoyed even today, prompted that you can actually count to tens with the bump system, something that is not that hard to do, but that can be pretty annoying at the start. The somewhat interesting lore can also be an additional value for some, especially for a short game such as this, and especially if you are determined to also play the second one. And the life the world shows is, in its simplicity, something more than what the majority of other JRPGs have done to make their world feel real, so if that is something you value, this one has you covered under this aspect. Still, this remains pretty rough around the edges. The level gatekeeping can be annoying, some bosses are not that well realized, and there is that classic old JRPG obscurity that permeates some quests here and there, but if you can push yourself past these inconveniences, then what awaits you is a pretty fine JRPG I think those who like a more action-oriented playstyle will probably enjoy without any big problem. However, you can see that this is just the start for something and that it was meant to go hand in hand with this too. As it doesn't resolve everything it introduced, this is a game that, by the end, is literally screaming you to go play the second game, and considering they are sold together, you can think of it as just switching the disc 1 with the disc 2 of the same game. You can find it kind of an inconvenience, considering they are two different games in the end, but as you have seen with this video, while Ys 2 is probably going to answer the various things Ys 1 left unanswered, you can easily play only Ys 1 and still have a relatively enclosed and unfinished experience. Personally, I enjoyed my time with this one. The gameplay was fun, some bosses were frustrating, and while I knew that the story was not the primary focus of this game even before entering it, I still hoped for something more under that aspect, which is probably why I'm going to also play Ys 2 and, gradually, all of the other Ys games, because if there is a thing this game left me, it is surely an interest for the whole Ys franchise. Anyways, this was all for this video, thank you very much for arriving here. I hope you have enjoyed the video, and as always, if you want to see more, consider subscribing and blah blah blah, all the other things that normally YouTubers say. Apart from this, I have nothing else to say, so this was all from SigmaOni, hope you have a nice day, and I'll see you all in my next video.